This week on the 302, we take a deep dive into the journey to freedom at the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. Get ready to immerse yourself in history. The 302 is headed your way. Hey 302, we are at the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. I'm joined by the director, Stephanie Lampkin, to talk a little bit about the exhibit Journey to Freedom. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about the center and Jane and Littleton Mitchell.
So the Jane and Littleton Mitchell Center for African American Heritage opened in October 2016 as part of the Delaware Historical Society. So as a campus, the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage was the newer addition. This is headquartered in the Delaware History Museum where we are now. So the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage is the space that's dedicated to telling the story of the Black experience in Delaware from 1639 with the landing of Anthony Swartz, or Black Anthony, in Delaware to the present. So it covers everything from enslavement to the American Revolution, the fight for freedom, the Underground Railroad as well, and then cycles around to talk about development of Black churches, fight for citizenship, and civil rights. So it's a all-encompassing experience. But Jane and Littleton Mitchell themselves, they were two individuals who were dedicated to fighting for rights for African Americans in Delaware. So Jane Mitchell was one of Delaware's first nurses at the Delaware Psychiatric Hospital, and Littleton Mitchell was a Tuskegee Airman during World War II. He was a teacher, a civil rights advocate, and he was also the head of the Delaware NAACP for about 30 years. So the center is named in both of their honor for the work that they have done for the community.
Now, when you come in to see the exhibit here, it's really very bold and filled with information, Journey to Freedom. And you mentioned the beginning to present day. So let's talk about that beginning. When you first come in, it talks about Black Anthony. Now, who was that?
In 1639, we have documentation of Black Anthony arriving in Delaware as an enslaved man to the governor of the time. His records, we don't have any images of what Black Anthony looked like, but we do have documents showing what his life may have been like. So his story brings us to that first point of what it meant to come to Delaware as a person of as African descent. His free name was Anthony Swartz. And so that's where we start our story, is with Anthony Swartz. So we use his free name because one of the things that's important about the exhibition Journey to Freedom is that agency, using individuals' names and telling their stories of their survival, of their courage, of their resilience. And so that's what's so significant about his story. There's been a lot of national attention on 1619, and it's kind of that same feel of that first moment of arrival for people of African descent, whether it was enslaved or in servitude. And that's where our story begins as well, but we start in 1639.
So you talk about that initial moment of contact where the story begins, and about being the individual, but also the environment, because at first, it seemed like everybody in Delaware was on board with slavery, but then you had some folks that were like, well, maybe this is not such a good idea. The Quakers, right?
Yes, and in Delaware's history, there is a lot of tension between enslavement and freedom, and that's seen in the Civil War as well, with Delaware being a slave state, but sympathizing and fighting on the side of the Union. So there's a lot of tension between the fact that there is enslavement in Delaware, particularly in the southern part of Delaware, which was historically more agricultural than the northern parts of Delaware, although there was slavery in the northern parts of Delaware as well. So you see this tension throughout Delaware's history, and that's really the foundation of that character of Delaware today. You even feel a difference between northern parts of Delaware and southern Delaware today.
That must have been very complex to, weave those two narratives together in an exhibit that someone can walk through. Talk to me about putting that, weaving that narrative together.
So, Journey to Freedom, there is so much content in this exhibition, and so it's so important that when visitors come, they consider coming multiple times. The content itself, there are so many stories, and we tell those stories through documentation, photographs, artwork, music. There's also audio experiences in terms of oral histories or singing in the case of when we talk about the rise of the Black Church in Delaware. And so it's very much a multi-sensory experience. We have interactives that are both digital and tactile. And so all of those work together to tell this kind of complicated narrative, not complicated in that we choose so many themes, but complicated because there's so many different ways in which you could have experienced life in Delaware being African American. And so we wanted to honor those stories. And so as you move through the exhibition, there are themes. So Delaware's original man of mystery is when you enter the exhibition. Right now we're sitting in front of Resisting Slavery, which is my personal favorite part of the exhibition because it talks about all of the ways in which enslaved people fought to free themselves from the lives that were not given to them by choice. And so from there, we follow that theme of community, freedom, and persistence and resilience, challenging the different systems which were designed to strip African Americans of their full civil rights. So yes, it is a complex story, but it's certainly one worth telling. Being part of the Delaware Historical Society, which is an independent, non-government agency, 501c3, it also gives us many opportunities to do education programs. And so we can dive deeper into some of these themes, such as the Underground Railroad, in one of our education programs, which is called Underground Railroad in Delaware, which we do with primary and secondary students.
That's great. We're going to dive in deeper into our discussion here at the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage when we come right back.
I'm Kim, the owner of Cakes by Kim in Wilmington, Delaware, and the 302 is so sweet. Woo!
Welcome back. We are at the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. We're talking a little bit about the exhibit Journey to Freedom. Now, one of the things that you highlight as you move through the exhibit is resisting slavery and how different people did this throughout the course of time. Talk to me a little bit about what we see whenever we come in and how rich it is in information.
So one of the sections in the exhibition, which is Resisting Slavery 1700s to 1800s, really pulls out some of the stories of individuals in the different methods that they used in order to free themselves from enslavement. In this particular section, when we have school groups that will visit the museum, museum to do tours or education programs usually draws their attention because we have a small board that's very tactile, and you can turn the tile. On one side, it talks about the method in which the person used to find their own freedom. So it could have been anything from arson to poison to theft. And you turn the block and it dives into that individual stories with their name and a bit of backstory about what it was that they did. We don't always know the outcome of their story, if they were recaptured or if they successfully found freedom. But that is one of the tasks of the historian, right? Is to continue to find any pieces that we have of that story, and when we have them, to tell them. So for me, that's such a important story to tell, is having our visitors really think about the ways in which, this is before the Emancipation Proclamation, before the Civil War, that enslaved people were seeking freedom.
So when you talk about enslaved people, there was a lot of solace back in the day taken at church. Faith played a huge role in the lives early and then through the ages, even present day. So talk to me about the evolution, as it were, of faith in the African American community.
Sure. So one of the projects that we did with the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage and the Delaware Historical Society, along with many community partners, is a project that was called Forging Faith, Building Freedom, which is an exploration of the African American faith experience in Delaware from 1800 to 1980, which we then published in a book that's available in our museum shop. But this really dives into individuals like Peter Spencer, some of those names in religious history that are or should be more prominent in terms of their role of establishing a sense of religious identity for the Black church. This history of Methodism and really it's about religious expression and that right to celebrate your religion. So this particular exhibition gave us an opportunity to really tell the history of Delaware's early churches. Mother Bethel, we talk about August Quarterly, which is a 150-plus year religious festival that occurred here in Wilmington as early as, the 1810s, and still continues today. So it's a festival that's deeply rooted in historical tradition that still occurs. And so it's just an excellent example of not just the way that the Mitchell Center invites community and works with community partners to preserve and share that history, but it's also a great example of the relevance of history to the present, right? You have such a deeply historical moment that is still studied and celebrated today.
So when you bring up August Quarterly, that's a prime example of how the church not only played a spiritual role, but also a very large social role, right?
That's right. And so the early history of the church, it was a place where not just religious expression, but it was also a source of education, social gathering, ceremony. So there were many elements that the church functioned as a way of preserving some of the traditions that are within the African American community today. And even now, when we think about, well, how is the history of the church relevant? It gives us a lot of topics to explore, right? There were many things that the church did to preserve some of the traditions that are part of the African American identity and African American community. But since then, the story has become much more nuanced. And so, this gives us an entry point to also think about, well, what are the other ways, what are other religious identities that also speak to the African American experience and African American identity? So it's just an excellent story. It's one that's connected to Wilmington. It's one that's connected to Delaware as a state, but also connects to a larger national story of Black religious experience.
So if someone is interested in maybe getting a copy, I mean, is it available online or here at the museum?
It is, so you can find it in our museum shop. The Delaware History Museum is open Wednesday through Sunday from noon to 5. It's also available on our website at dehistory.org.
All right, we're going to talk more about Journey to Freedom when we come right back.
Hi, I'm Jean from the Morris Estate, and I love learning about history on the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about Journey to Freedom here at the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage. And as you go through the exhibit, it talks about the Civil War and the role that Black Delawareans played. It takes us to the Emancipation Proclamation and asks the question, does equal really mean equal?
And that's an excellent question. And the reason that we've posed that question on the wall in that case for the exhibition is this is when we dive into the Reconstruction Amendments, passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which were delayed until 1901 for ratification in Delaware. So it really begs this question of why was there this delay? Well, if you're granted rights through the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, were you now equal? So currently the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage is spearheading a project with partners at the University of Delaware, Delaware State University, and the Delaware Social Justice Remembrance Coalition called Unequal Justice in Delaware, Rewriting the Narrative. And this project is an exploration of that period of post-emancipation where we're heading into Jim Crow, and all of a sudden we have these documents that point to lynching occurring in Delaware. 1903 being one of the better known examples. There is a state marker in Green Bank Mills Park dedicated to George White, who was a man who was lynched in 1903. And so this project is designed to interrogate and dive into that question of what was Delaware like after 1865, in 1890, in 1903, where we see these occurrences of racial violence, whether it's lynching, excessive use of the whipping post, which is also discussed in this section of the exhibition, and also the advocacy within the Black community specifically, but also among allies to end such unequal distribution of justice against the Black community. And so this project is meant to complicate that question even more and say, well, what was Delaware like? In not just Newcastle County, but also Kent and Sussex counties. What was it like in the 1890s and the turn of the century?
So what was it like for somebody who, can't wait to come and see the exhibit, but it needs a little bit of, understanding prior to walking in, afterward?
Sure. And so what the first part of the exhibit is designed to do is really give you that context of the colonial period, 1639, resisting slavery, the Underground Railroad, Delaware as a border state during the Civil War, and the role that African Americans played in fighting in the Civil War. And it leads you into the Reconstruction Amendments in this kind of delayed ratification. And then even after that, you get this rise of the NAACP. You start to see the establishment of schools specifically for African American students. Howard High School is a great story and such a significant one that we tell in this exhibition. It rolls us into desegregation in Brown versus Board of Education, into World War I and World War II, and finally into artistic expression. And so when you follow the narrative and the story, you can see where there have been challenges and opposition, but also success and determination. And so when you take the exhibit as a whole, you really get that story.
Yeah, it's a very fluid portrait of history. And if someone wants to come in and check it out, it's going to take a little bit of time because there's so much information here. What are the hours? When can they do that?
Sure. So you can visit the Delaware History Museum Wednesday through Sunday from noon to 5. We're open to the public. We also have wonderful evening events and weekend events, and you can find those events on our calendar that's on our website, dehistory.org. You can also follow our Facebook page at Delaware Historical Society and Mitchell Center for African American Heritage to learn more.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. It really is a fascinating discussion for a fascinating exhibit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. For more information on the Mitchell Center, visit dehistory.org. That'll do it for this week's episode. We leave you now with some beauty shots of Wilmington. Until next time, we'll see you on the 302.